managers for HCP Vault. I will be sharing a presentation with you today on the product as well as the roadmap. So let me share my screen. Okay, I'm gonna assume that that is working. So again, hi, I'm Samantha. I'm one of the product managers for HCP Vault. I've been at HashiCorp for going on a year and a half now. And I'm here to talk to you today about our cloud or managed service offering of Vault. So that is HCP Vault. This will allow you to have production-ready clusters as well as development or non-production proof of concept clusters. We offer two different types. The reason behind offering Vault as a managed service comes from a couple of different points. One of which was that we often heard customers like yourselves had a lot of historic challenges in seeing the time to value in setting up Vault. And so in order to accomplish this, we're offering one-click push button deployments to allow you with ready-to-use Vault clusters so that you can focus more so on actually incorporating them within your application and less time on actually setting up Vault. We'd heard that this was a very common pain point across customers, and it was a very timely process historically. In addition to allowing you to see faster time to value and spinning these up a lot quicker, another thing that we are handling on our end is some automated maintenance. So this would include automated snapshot restores on a 24-hour cadence with the ability for you to onset this a lot faster should you desire. We'll also be offering some sort of audit logging mechanisms that includes bulk downloads as well as audit log exports. In addition, we will also be upgrading you consistently to the latest and greatest. Another common pain point we see amongst customers is not updating their Vault clusters over long periods of time, eventually seeing a feature that they want in a newer version and having to skip over multiple versions in order to get there. So we want to eliminate that pain point when it comes to using us as a managed service and constantly giving you our latest and greatest Vault offering. In addition to the in addition to this maintenance work that we do on our end, we will also be offering you 24/7 monitoring with on-call staff and a rigorous 99.9% SLA that we're constantly looking into raising. All production grade clusters that we offer are highly available, 3-node clusters. They're monitored 24/7, like I mentioned, by our on-call support staff, as well as on-call engineers, with silver tier as the default SLA, but we also offer gold tier as an SLA as well. So with that being said, I'm now going to go through this presentation. This will go over what the HCP platform is, how HCP Vault runs on that platform and its current limitations, if there are any. And finally, we'll end with a roadmap overview going over what's up and coming for HCP Vault and what you can expect. As mentioned, happy to answer any questions. Feel free to put them in the chat or ask throughout. We will try and get them to them towards the end of the presentation, but I will do my best to keep it slow so that I don't go over anything too quickly. So as I mentioned, one of the benefits of using Vault as a managed service on HCP is this sort of flexibility in choice. We as HashiCorp will now be responsible for deploying and operating your Vault cluster so that you as the user or customer can focus much more on adoption and actually integrating it into your applications. In this way, we lower the operational overhead on your part by taking care of the spin up of the Vault cluster, keeping it constantly up to date, and handling your monitoring on your behalf so that you can really focus on actually deploying Vault cluster and using all of its features to the best of their capability. So eventually, we will be a multi-cloud platform. Currently, we're on AWS only, but we do plan on offering our services on other cloud providers, even as soon as towards the end of this year. As I mentioned, you have this ability to spin up a cluster in a matter of minutes via either our UI or the HCP Terraform provider, if you're more familiar with Terraform. When you do this, we create what's called an HVN, which is essentially a VPC in a single region that allows you to sort of spin up your Vault cluster within any of the particular regions that we offer on AWS. Like I mentioned, as soon as these are spun up, they are production ready. They are 3 nodes spread across availability zones. And on our end, if we do ever sense an unhealthy standby node, they are quickly remediated. As I mentioned, we do have a 99.9% uptime. We will go over the different types of production grade clusters as well as our development non-prod clusters in a future slide. But I just wanted to go over sort of what the multi-cloud platform looks like, or the cloud platform looks like, and where we're headed. So as I mentioned, you would spin up an HVN or a VPC in a particular region, dependent on the ones that we offer. We do plan on eventually offering all of these. As far as our newer offerings, Singapore and Sydney were the ones that came a bit later as of last year. We do plan, like I mentioned, on adding the rest of these available regions. And while we are exclusively hosted on AWS for now, we do plan on offering our services on other cloud providers in the future. But as you can see, we have a couple of different regions spread across both North America and Europe, as well as a few in the Asia Pacific region. So that was sort of a very quick overview of the platform itself. I'll now be going over HCP Vault on the platform and what that looks like. I'll talk to some of the features that we currently have in place and what HashiCorp controls on our end from a security perspective. So this is sort of going over the general overview of what you can expect on an HCP Vault cluster in terms of security. While we do offer namespace support, which has been proven to help with multi-tenancy historically, HCP Vault as of today is still single tenant. And for that reason, we can't technically be defined as a SaaS product. We are still a managed service product, but because we are single tenant, we don't technically fall under that definition. Each HCP account is coupled with its own separate AWS account, which offers complete isolation across customers. And for that reason, we are single tenant and cannot be classified as multi-tenant. In addition to this, everything is end-to-end encrypted. Snapshots are stored in an encrypted S3 bucket within what's called the control plane, which is all of the HashiCorp managed Vault data. Currently, that is all located within the US, but we will be co-locating them soon within your cluster. So if data locality is of any concern, that will be addressed by the end of this year. In addition, audit logs are encrypted and stored in an S3 bucket in the same account as the cluster. So technically they are co-located with your cluster. We are currently seeing that when it comes to bulk download of audit logs, they are sent back to the US to concatenate and then sent back to the region in which your cluster is located. We also plan on fixing this later this year. So again, if data locality is a concern, that should be addressed. As far as the rest of your Vault data, all of it is encrypted in EBS storage and never leaves the designated AWS account that your cluster, that has been provisioned along with your cluster when it is spun up. So you don't have any concerns over both it being accessible as well as unencrypted. Oh, sorry, was there a question?
Oh, I think it was an accident. Go ahead, Samantha.
Okay. And finally, everything is hardened. We align with all of the current Vault best practices that you can expect from our enterprise offering. Clusters are built in with end-to-end TLS, immutable tokens, swap disabled. As I mentioned, you can go through our Vault production hardening guideline. All of the expectations you can have there, you should also expect from us as a managed service. I'm going to briefly go over some of our compliance initiatives. These can be provided should you need so. If you need to, please contact your sales rep. But these are the certifications and audits that we currently have in place. If they aren't listed here, it's likely that we don't support them yet, but we may be working on internally supporting them eventually. As I mentioned, data locality as it pertains to GDPR is a priority for the latter half of this year, but as of right now, we do offer some sort of data processing agreements. And finally, if you reach out to your sales rep, they should be able to provide these to you ad hoc if that is necessary. But I won't spend too much time on this. I'm going to go over briefly some of the most common platform security concerns. These again can be provided to you after this presentation if I do go through these fairly quickly. I know it's a lot of text on the slide. But just to go through them, we do not have any access to any individual secrets, nor can we modify any of your policies. The account that we provide for you, also referred to as the data plane account internally. This is the AWS account that we spin up that's affiliated with your cluster. All of those connections to that account are logged and made available to customers. We'll also be providing you some sort of platform or control plane audit logs so you can see on our end what we are doing maintenance-wise. If you ever need to do that. The root token that we use to set up your Vault cluster is only used for initial setup and then immediately revoked on our end. The top level namespace on HCP Vault clusters, rather than being root, is actually the admin namespace. We're potentially thinking of changing this in the future, but that may be something that you might want to think about when it comes to migrating over to the cloud. That may be of a concern. There might need to be some namespace changes there. In addition, we support KMS auto unsealing. So when a cluster is created, a unique KMS key is created with it and trusted only with the affiliated EC2 instances connected to that cluster. recovery keys for that cluster are encrypted and stored within the control plane, so that if you do, for whatever reason, need some sort of emergency recovery mechanisms, we should be able to provide those for you. But as I mentioned, we don't have any access to any individual secrets or policies. We can't make changes on your behalf. And as far as the top level namespace or root access, that's immediately revoked as soon as we're done spinning up your cluster. So as far as our connectivity or networking options, when it comes to HCP Vault, we offer a few different ones. Both private and public connection options are available for you should you choose to go with either of those. While public URL is an option, it's not typically recommended for production use case. It actually violates some of our production hardening guidelines. However, for proof of concept or ready to test clusters, it is often encouraged, as you can see a far faster setup time when using a public URL. But we also offer VPC peering as well as transit gateway. These are the only two mechanisms we offer as far as networking goes to right now to connect to your own self-managed resources, and it is highly recommended. While I mentioned that public is faster often with time to value, these do have some pretty great tutorials in place, and we've seen them fairly easily used by customers historically. But if you do have any feedback as far as connectivity goes, we are actively considering other options here as well to add into the platform. But as of right now, these are the only three that we offer so that you can connect to your self-managed resources. As I mentioned, within the push of a button, you should be able to spin up your Vault clusters, both production and non-production. This is a screenshot of what the process looks like in the UI. We actually offer a few more tiers now, so this likely should be updated. But essentially, when it comes to spinning up your cluster, there are only a few steps needed in order to do this. One is to name your cluster, assign it to an HVN, which, as I mentioned, is limited currently to the AWS regions that we provide. And within a matter of minutes, your Vault cluster should be live. This currently takes around 15 minutes, but we're actively working on potentially improving this and making that spin up time even faster for you. I'm now going to talk a little bit into some of the maintenance work that we do on your behalf, or operational work that we'll be fronting for you. So one of these operational tasks that we try and help out with has to do with snapshots. We automatically take snapshots every 24 hours. And as I mentioned, you have the options to take these at a more frequent cadence should you like. And currently we only store snapshots for up to 30 days after they're taken. This shouldn't be a problem as we do continue to take them on a 24-hour cadence, but should you want to store them for 60 or 90 days, we will be offering these sort of extendable options later this year. And then as far as audit logs go, I mentioned earlier, there are a couple of different ways you can access these, one of which is downloading them in bulk within our platform in the UI. Another of which is we now offer certain metrics export configurations. We offer them to Grafana, Datadog, and Splunk. For Splunk, that includes both cloud and enterprise. We do plan on potentially offering more of these observability platforms in the future. So if you're using something like CloudWatch, for example, we are potentially thinking about incorporating those as well, or maybe even doing a universal exporter. But as of right now, these are the only ways to access your audit logs. I'm now going to go over the auth methods and secrets engines that we currently validated on the platform and support on the platform, as well as the ones that we are working on supporting. I just want to call out that just because you may see auth methods on the right side of this chart that you would expect, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not supported on the platform or they don't work on HCP Vault. It just means that we haven't internally validated and tested them, and we are actively doing so right now. So by the end of this quarter, you should be able to see all of the expected auth methods on the right, on the left. Any constraints that we may encounter should be documented already, but as of right now, most of these auth methods we've seen customers use successfully in the past, and so it shouldn't be as much of a concern if they are on the right. They likely do work, it's just that we haven't spent the time to test internally, but we are now. Similarly to secrets engines, as I mentioned, just because they're not validated internally doesn't mean they don't work. We just haven't spent the time to rigorously test them internally. As I mentioned, within this quarter, all of the constraints will be documented and prioritized, and most of these secrets engines you see on the right will now be on the left. Lastly, this also includes database secrets engines. So we'll be validating the rest of these as well. You can expect Cassandra, MySQL, Maria, for example, all of the typical database secrets engines you would expect. We also plan on supporting the Oracle database plugin eventually, so that you will also be able to use that one. A little bit different given that that requires a plugin, but as far as the rest of these database secrets engines go, for the ones that don't require an external plugin, you should be able to see those validated a bit sooner. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be going over the tiers in which we offer on HCP Vault, both of our production as well as non-production typical tiers. I do note Starter on here as one of our SKUs that we offer to our customers. However, this isn't typically offered to contract customers. So if you do end up talking with a sales rep after this and that isn't mentioned, it's just because it's not traditionally included for contract. It's generally self-serve only. But Dev is our standard non-production offering. It's often used for proof of concepts or testing. It's a single node cluster. It does not include snapshots or audit logs, and it is outside the range of our SLA. There is also a 25 client count limit that we enforce on Dev clusters as well. I'll say this, if you'd like to start on a Dev cluster and eventually have a desire to move up to Starter, Standard, or Plus, which isn't mentioned on here, but I'll go over in a minute, that in-place scaling is now currently available. So we've seen customers start off on a Dev cluster and then eventually want to move up to Standard, and we can spin that up for you without you expecting any downtime in place. So anything that you have set up on your development cluster, you would also see on your Standard cluster. But as I mentioned, our Starter and Standard clusters are 3 nodes spread across availability zones with high availability. There is also a 25 client count limit on Starter clusters that isn't included on the Standard. And both Starter and Standard align to our SLA as well. So now I'm going to go over the Plus SKU very briefly, which is our newest offering and our highest tier that we offer. The Plus SKU is one past Standard, and this now includes multi-region performance replication as well as paths filters. So should you want to offer or to have some sort of cross HVN replication, this is where we offer it. Is performance replication only. Disaster recovery is not covered within this SKU. This is secrets access management across multiple regions, obviously still limited within the regions that we offer, but as I mentioned, we do eventually plan on offering more as it comes. This should largely address a lot of latency concerns you may have when it comes to dispersing data across different regions. It's asynchronous and replicates changes to a secondary cluster. This is exactly how you would expect performance replication on your Vault Enterprise clusters. And as you can see, replication occurs for the following. Access tokens are not replicated. And as I mentioned, you do have some sort of paths filtering here. So should you only want data limited to a certain region, you should be able to enforce that within the platform as well. So that is it for the HCP Vault overview as well as the platform overview. I'm now going to talk briefly about our roadmap, and then Yishan and I will be able to go over some questions. So as I mentioned, we recently launched the Plus SKU, so I won't go over that again, but that came out early this year, a few months ago, I bet. Recently, we also shipped MFA. So currently we offer 4 different types of MFA. This is the exact same as you can expect on our open source or enterprise offerings. This recently came with the Vault 110 upgrade. I encourage you all to read about it. As I mentioned, we will be validating the rest of the secrets engine by the end of this quarter, as well as the auth methods. For secrets engines, this includes both database secrets engines as well as the other ones that we've mentioned. We will also be allowing you to customize the length of your snapshots past 30 days, should you desire. Currently, when it comes to cluster deletion, we don't offer any sort of recovery mechanism here, but we will be offering a grace period for cluster deletion, so that should you accidentally delete a Vault cluster or delete the wrong Vault cluster, we should be able to recover that for you pretty much instantaneously in accordance with our SLA. We'll also be offering maintenance windows for major version upgrades. So currently we keep all of your Vault clusters up to date on the latest and greatest, but traditionally we will inform you of our own maintenance windows beforehand if you were on a production grade cluster. but we will be offering more configurability here, so that should you desire to have a certain maintenance window that you can set on your own schedule for these upgrades or security improvements, we can follow those, so that just in case there is any downtime or anything breaks due to an upgrade, we should be able to do that during a non-high production time for you. In addition, we're looking at potentially increasing our SLA and improving our onboarding experience. We will be offering Sentinel on the Plus SKU, so that if you currently use that on Vault Enterprise, you can expect that same functionality within HCP Vault. As I mentioned, we'll also be supporting the Oracle plugin, and eventually, I talked about us being a multi-cloud platform, but we are exclusively offered on AWS. We will be offering our services on Azure by the end of this year. Like I mentioned, we will be adhering to the rest of the AWS regions that AWS currently offers. We will no longer be limited in that scope. And finally, we will be addressing some of the data locality concerns. So that includes the co-location of snapshots, and everything else should be up to date as far as the data locality requirements go. So that is it for what I had for our roadmap. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but with that being said, I think Yishan and I can start taking some questions.
Yeah, thanks everyone. If you have any questions, continue to fill them out in chat. I think we'll start with some of these from Brian. Thanks, Brian, for kind of jumping in and leading the charge with the questions. I'll kind of take your first one in terms of, can we cover the HCP failover model from a client perspective? So yeah, so with HCP Vault, as Samantha mentioned, everything is architected for HA, so that when there are instances of a single node failure, Vault will just automatically kind of re-engage in the leader election. It'll re-elect a new leader. So in case that node fails, HCP as a platform is going to detect and recover the node, and then we'll replace that failed node and update the DNS entry. Right now, our time frame for that it's a process that takes about 5 minutes without any engagement from the customer needed. Typically, we may notify after the fact, but there's usually no downtime or no direct outreach needed for the customer to engage HashiCorp on that. There were a few more questions as well from Brian. So this one was, when will HCP Vault be supported natively with HCP Consul? Vault has Consul service registration configuration, but not referring to the Consul backend storage. Samantha, do you want to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can take this one. So we are actively working on this sort of better together story that HashiCorp is known for. We want it to be easy to incorporate all products across the platform. And in particular, Consul is the second longest, or is one of the other products that we offer within HCP. As you mentioned, as far as Consul backend storage goes, we are only integrated storage only when it comes to HCP Vault clusters. And I'm not sure, it hasn't been prioritized yet whether or not we will continue to offer Consul backend storage. As far as other integrations with Consul, we have some tutorials coming out on using Vault as an intermediate CA, for example, for Consul. But as far as service registration goes and configuration, we haven't necessarily prioritized that on our end, but we are actively working on refining this better together story and working on improving our integrations with Consul. Just please be patient with us, as you can see, our roadmap is pretty rigorous already. But I hope that answered at least some of your question.
Yeah, thanks, Samantha. And then the next question was, why store snapshots outside the tenant account? I can answer some of this, and then Samantha, feel free to fill in. I think so. I think there are kind of two parts to this. One is kind of the KMS key itself, that we spin up the cluster for you. And the second is operational advantage in terms of when you use HCP Vault, you're entrusting HashiCorp to basically manage your Vault cluster for you and take that kind of day-to-day operational overhead off your hands. By having HashiCorp be able to snore and access the snapshots, it actually opens us up to kind of do more for you as a customer when it comes to dealing with those snapshots. So there's things that we're working on where by having the direct ownership and storage of the snapshots, we can help you do things like down the road, like potentially restoring those snapshots to new clusters if you need be, giving you a backup, right? So that if you do have snapshots that are being stored in your tenant account and something happens with your tenant account, HashiCorp is still there to protect and provide kind of a backup for you in that scenario. So those are kind of the two kind of key considerations. Samantha, if you have any other, feel free to jump in.
Just that we do plan on co-locating them within the same region as your cluster. So if this is a concern around locality, that is also coming, but I think you covered the rest of it.
Yeah. The next question from Brian, I'm just going in chronological order to some degree. The next question from Brian was, does HCP Vault plan to support AWS or GCP HSM? So Brian, just for clarification, is this, you're talking about like bringing your own KMS key? Oh, no, HSM on cloud providers. Yeah, so for us, I think this is definitely in the plans. It's just a question of when. I think we're all aware of kind of where we need to move for in terms of building out the product and maturing it and making it robust. So there are certainly plans, but we just don't have any concrete timelines to share yet. The next question is around, is HCP going to support AWS Private Link and the equivalent on Google? Which I think is Private Service Connect. So I think there was another question also later on from another individual about also supporting Private Link. Yeah, this is something that we're aware of and we're actively tracking. And I think you folks should see it sooner rather than later. This is a fairly popular request. And we certainly plan on expanding the networking options and making it more accessible to access HCP Vault clusters from AWS and other cloud providers. So I'll just kind of go through and pick another question. So one from Daryl about, has anyone successfully obtained an FDA approval for medical system using Vault? So Daryl, for this event specifically, we're talking HCP Vault. In terms of self-managed Vault, which is where I think your question is more going towards, which is like, Vault Enterprise, Vault On-Prem. Has anyone actually like embedded that in like some medical system? I don't know. I'm sure there are some medical case studies. The only question is, it's just a matter of probably NDA and a matter of kind of public knowledge. So I'm sure if you want to dig more about kind of Vault's case studies, there are a few that are publicly available on the HashiCorp website. I think a few of them in the medical field, if I remember, were like Athena Health and a few more. But I'm sure people can provide you that information offline if need be. So the next question was, did audit log streaming for HCP Vault get implemented using Vector underneath? Samantha, do you happen to know this or no?
I do, but we don't traditionally share that information. I would encourage you to read through some of the Learn tutorials out there. You can expect the best practices when it comes to our implementation. That's all I'll say on the subject.
Yeah, and then the next question from Brian, will plugin engines auth be supported on HCP Vault? Brian, for clarification, are you asking for like third-party custom plugins that like you potentially authored yourself for your Vault cluster already? Okay, while I wait for Brian to respond, I'll just keep going through the questions. So the next one was from Teresa. Do you plan to support Teradata Vantage? Samantha, would you know about this one?
Let me get back to you on this question. I think we should skip it for now and then come back to it.
Yeah, I've heard of this loosely in the past, but it's not a very popular request. So the next one, for the scalability stated limits, is that enforced at a gateway load balancer level, or is that a cluster API limitation recommendation capability limit? So yeah, so Brian, I think this kind of goes into kind of more of the platform architecture, which I think between Samantha and I, we're not sure how much we can share publicly in this forum. I'm sure privately, if you want to reach out to your account team and start that conversation, I'm sure there's more we could provide under NDA. But typically, it's a little hard for us to share about kind of the platform architecture and kind of the technical decisions that went into there for a variety of kind of risk-related reasons. And then your next question from Brian, when will HCP products be offered on GCP? So yeah, as Samantha mentioned, we're currently working on Azure now, and the goal is to go to Azure, and then certainly the next cloud after that would be GCP. It's hard for us to give a concrete timeline right now, but I would say certainly soon rather than later, and it's certainly something that's already been committed and targeted. It's just a matter of when and versus not and versus what. So you wouldn't expect like after Azure, the next cloud that we support would be like Ali Cloud or Hertzner. It would be GCP. Yeah, so Brian responded in terms of, yeah, we are investigating developing some pluggable secret engines to use on our own platform, none currently in use. Yeah, so for sure. So the plugin, the whole plugin thing is interesting, right? Because with secret engines and auth methods, Vault treats those as plugins. And at HashiCorp, there's kind of three ways we distinguish plugins. There's obviously the HashiCorp supported plugins. Those are the ones that come with Vault out of the box. Those are the ones that we validate, that we support, that we maintain. So those are the plugins that we are fairly confident on, and also go through production kind of testing and also usage. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket is like partner supported plugins. So if you're working with like a partner who has built their own plugin, their own secret engines or auth methods, those partners are ones that are actively maintaining. In a lot of cases, the enterprises that use partner supported plugins are companies that already have existing contracts, or at least some relationship, whether commercial or open source. They have existing relationships with that partner. So they generally have that confidence to use those partner supported plugins. And then obviously the last bucket is, plugins that people author themselves for their own environments to conform to the things that they need. And those are a lot more trickier because, that introduces kind of a whole bucket of risk. In terms of for self-managed open source Vault or Vault Enterprise, that risk is greatly reduced because you're the one controlling your cluster. We're still investigating how to best support the scenario where someone does want to bring kind of their own internally written custom plugins. And there's also a lot of work happening. I can share a little bit on Vault in general, not just in Vault Cloud, but also Vault in general, where the team is actively evaluating on ways to improve like the whole plugin experience, both in like the mechanism, the way that you consume plugins, the way you install the plugins on your cluster, and then as well as how you drive that moving forward in a cloud environment. So there's definitely a lot of big work and big plans happening for plugins in general in Vault, and not just on Vault Cloud. Cool. So there was another question on, is there any plan to extend SaaS service to legacy on-prem data center service, whether in the form of a gateway? So we definitely addressed this a little earlier, but I'm happy to kind of talk through again. So certainly like private link would be one of the ways that we could support it. There's also work happening internally as well in terms of this topic, in terms of more holistic solution between on-prem Vault clusters and Vault Cloud clusters. And so I think folks should expect to hear something about this relatively soon, but that is definitely a big initiative and priority for the company. So the next question from Sumi, will HCP Vault integrate with native vaults present in cloud platforms, e.g. Azure Key Vault, AWS Secrets Manager, GCP Secrets Manager? Samantha, did you want to take this one?
Yeah, we should support all of these as of today. Obviously, there are certain AWS services that are exclusive, unfortunately, to the AWS Secrets Manager that we can't access for you, like RDS, for example. But as far as other multi-cloud configurations here, we should support them all as of today when it comes to like secrets engines and auth methods. So you should be able to expect those unless it's on one of our more Vault Premium offerings. Like we kind of mentioned HSM earlier, but if there are any sort of ADP or governance and policy features that we haven't mentioned, those may not be included right away and are later to be prioritized. But as far as like supporting like Azure Secrets Engine, AWS Secrets Engine, we should support all of those as of now, regardless of whether or not we're only exclusively offered on AWS.
Yeah, so I think the next question was around migration in general, so migration stories. So there are definitely some companies out there that have done the migration, but we don't have anything public yet. So it's hard for us to comment on this, especially in this forum. But I would say migration is certainly a big topic for us. Right now, we're actively looking into migration and kind of researching all the different ways we could introduce either that mechanism or that tooling to help someone migrate from, let's say, their existing self-managed Vault clusters to Vault Cloud. Obviously, Brian, I think in your example, that's one that pertains, but I think from John's comment in terms of what about, migrating existing secrets from AWS Secrets Manager to HCP Vault, that's also something that we're considering as well. Migration itself is a fairly loaded and very kind of broad term, and we want to make sure that we're kind of building the right thing. So it's hard for us to kind of commit and say we know exactly what conditions the migration will be after implementation, but it's definitely still a priority for us in terms of improving that ease of use of getting someone from their existing secret setup to Vault Cloud for their secret setup. So the next question was from you, and about how about single tenant performance versus cluster? Does the performance scale with clusters? So right now I can say like, for a little bit, and then Samantha, feel free to chime in. So yeah, everything is, there's no multi-tenancy for HCP Vault. So everything is single tenant, both for security and performance purposes. But I'm not sure what you mean by single tenant versus cluster, because Vault itself runs in clusters. But go ahead, Samantha.
I'll just take a stab at this question. I may be incorrect here, but as far as your expectations around performance go, you should expect the same performance regardless of whether or not your cluster is a primary or a secondary. Standard clusters, which don't offer performance replication, should perform at the same level you would expect on Plus, regardless of like their replication status, I guess. In that regard, though, you can expect to see latency improvements. So let's say you were trying to access data historically on a cluster that is within the US, as you would expect with normal performance replication. Once you replicate in Europe, for example, if you were trying to access it from Europe, you should expect to see latency improvements. But as far as like, does this actually affect the performance level that you would normally expect for your replication? No. But I could be incorrect in my interpretation of this question.
Cool, thank you, Samantha. So Brian had a question, what about on-prem snapshot uploads to HCP? So yeah, so currently, Brian, you can't upload your snapshots of other clusters to HCP. And I would question also how useful that would be too as well, because they're completely different, KMS keys. But Samantha, did you want to add in anything more for that?
Just that when it comes to migration, we're investigating a couple of different pathways that we could potentially do in order to help better facilitate this. We do currently have some scripts online. I saw someone later on ask about like any sort of GitHub tutorials around migration. I know some of our SEs here have worked on some things that likely can be shared. But there are a couple different options we have here. We could partner with a third-party service to better help you migrate. We could potentially offer some sort of like raft snapshot integration in which you could bring your own snapshot. Obviously there are some downstream things that might change here, especially given that everything is nested under admin. Recently within Vault 110, they offered this namespace mount move command, which should make at least this replication of your environment on HCP a bit easier. But there are a couple of different ways we could go about offering some sort of migration tooling outside of just like your standard push button migration, which even then, like I said, will it break things downstream? Possibly. So we are actively looking at what the best way to approach this problem is. Obviously, it's very long-winded, and I'm sure other folks here have potentially looked into moving onto a cloud service, even if it's outside of their secrets management services. But we are currently actively investigating this, and there is some scripts online that can help with this movement and some considerations there when it comes to migrating that you can access via our docs.
Yeah, thanks, Samantha. I think you might like this one. I think this next question is about cluster scaling, but it's like, so Brian asked, what about something like HCP Vault Dev to standard to Plus migration/upgrades? Could clusters be directly migrated between SKUs, or could a Plus cluster be built? Could you build a Plus cluster from a snapshot from a Dev cluster?
Oh, yeah, we offer this. So any in-place scaling that you can expect. So if you want to go from Dev to standard or Dev to Plus, you should be able to do without having to restart. This was a pretty common pain point amongst customers and so we launched this tooling somewhat late last year. There are a couple caveats here. So for example, if you want to downscale, I guess I should have mentioned this, within standard and Plus, we offer 3 different sizes as well. So if you want to have like a standard large cluster, I forget what exactly the configurations are there or the instance types, but you should be able to resize them as well. So let's say you start off on a standard small and find your data exceeds that level and you now need a standard large. We should be able to scale you in place that way without having you start over. The one caveat here I was going to mention has to do with downsizing. So you can actually downsize or even downscale. So if you start off on Plus and decide you don't need performance replication, if you stop using it, you should be able to downgrade back down to standard should you decide. but you can't downgrade back to dev clusters. This causes some residual complications from going from a 3-node offering to a single node offering that just weren't worth the pain for us. And we don't imagine many customers would want this either way. But to answer your question, you can switch pretty seamlessly within the SKUs. This is available both within our UI as well as Terraform provider, and it was released, I think, in November of last year. So exciting things. We've only received positive feedback so far. Hasn't broken for anyone yet. So that is available.
Awesome. Thank you, Samantha. I'll take the next question from Jim, which was, how about integrating existing on-prem enterprise with a cloud instance? So Jim, if I'm interpreting your question correctly, I think one of the scenario that you're kind of laying out is like, what if you potentially use like performance replication, where you had an existing on-prem Vault Enterprise cluster, and then you had Vault Cloud as kind of either a secondary to that cluster. So that's also something that we're definitely actively looking at as well. I would also just caveat too, that because we are a public company, we are extremely restricted or limited in the things that we can say. There are things that we would like to certainly share with this community, but there's just always going to be limits as to kind of questions on when is something coming, and then like how far along we are to developing something that we are just restricted in our ability to say. Pre-IPO, it was a different story, but post-IPO is a very different world of governance. Cool. So Andrew had a question. I know this was touched upon, but as a reminder, can you get replication DR capabilities in cloud hosted Vault? Samantha, do you want to take the honors for this one?
Replication capabilities as far as like what we currently offer.
Yeah, it sounds like, so I think this gentleman is asking about kind of performance replication. So yeah, we definitely offer performance replication today. That was launched in Plus SKU. As for disaster recovery, we offer the core capability in the way it's HA and it's architected, but I would caveat that it's not disaster recovery one-to-one with the disaster recovery that you might be referring to for Vault Enterprise. So in Vault Enterprise, disaster recovery is its own kind of closed source feature. And then within HCP as a platform, which Vault Cloud is built on, it does offer that HA and to some degree that DR that's been architected into Vault Cloud itself, but it's not the DR capability itself. So we today on HCP Vault, you can't achieve that clear active standby kind of mode that you would with DR for the self-managed Vault. But that again, I think is really kind of a totally different situation. I think when you think about like the cloud providers, the public cloud providers like AWS, Azure, GCP, usually when people are thinking about DR, they're kind of preparing for the worst case scenario in which an entire region fails over, which is extremely rare, if not hasn't happened. It would be unprecedented. But I think the thing that is interesting to note here is that when you think about kind of the DR that is available for cloud managed services, not even AWS is able to provide failover for their own region failures for their own services. So that's kind of one of the areas that we are currently exploring in terms of like, well, we know that there's certain standards in SaaS products, but it's also insightful for us to be able to see, hey, what is our RTO, what is our RPO, and how would we fail over, and what is the speed at which customers would expect us to recover from common failure scenarios around data or just resiliency of the underlying compute itself. So cool. So a question from Vipul: does HCP support bring your own encryption keys? How do you ensure the HCP encryption key is secured? Samantha, would you like to take this one?
So we don't offer bring your own encryption key as of yet. It's something we're actively looking into. I did briefly cover this in the slide, but I know I went through that security section fairly quickly. So as far as making sure that the key that we use for seal and unseal is secured, that's affiliated with your data plane or AWS account. So as I mentioned, a unique KMS key is created within this data plane account or AWS account we provision that goes along with the Vault cluster that we create for you. And this key is only trusted on the EC2 instances affiliated with your cluster and is stored and end-to-end encrypted within that same account in an EC2 instance. So that's how we ensure that this one encryption key is secured on our behalf. As far as bring your own key comes, like I mentioned, it's something we're actively investigating. There are some residual complications here, and we don't offer that as of yet, but it is something that we are looking into and taking as a feature request.
For sure. I don't see any, more in DR from Ryan. So HTTP clusters are HA, however, there's no out of region peer DR vault cluster. Yes, as of today, that's correct. Yeah, so to follow up on Brian's comment, yeah, it's something that we're definitely exploring on the roadmap. I think there are kind of a lot of constraints to think through in scenarios. Like for instance, like when we get to a situation where we support all the AWS regions on HCP. So like you're able to pick whatever AWS region you want that's available and you get to spin up for it. And it covers like all the regions that AWS does offer or any other public cloud. What can get kind of really complicated from a technical standpoint is that let's say you spin up your cluster in US West 1, and then you want to achieve that active standby model. And so maybe US West 1 is the active cluster, and then you have your standby or passive cluster in like some entirely different region in EMEA or APAC. The reality is like, how would, an open technical question that, we've been internally discussing is like, well, unless you've set up that, region yourself, like you almost need to be able to have that, out of region peer DR vault cluster available in almost every other single region to be able to make that swap in real time. So that if there is that very rare kind of disaster scenario where your primary region entirely goes down, you would have to quickly swap over to your passive. But there's also plenty of questions like the cascading failures of, well, if that other region goes down, what about another passive, which then kind of opens up kind of the technical can of worms, so to speak. So it is definitely something that we're looking into without a doubt. But I would say it's certainly a big effort. So question from Sumi, if there is a federal request to get access to client data, can HashiCorp bypass client approval encryption key and provide data to the federal government? This sounds like a security question, like almost like a law enforcement question, which I don't know how much anyone could comment on. I'm sure if there's a federal request to access any customer data, I forgot what the terminology or the acronym is there, but my understanding is that that's actually a legal mandate that every company has to comply to. So like when the government agencies ask like Facebook or Google or anyone else for like certain user data, that is a formal request that does have to get processed. So in terms of like how this differs on like a federal versus like government levels beyond the US border, this is a really good question for the legal team. And so if this is kind of a topic of interest, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to your account manager or our sales team, and they'll be able to pull in the question for you specific to your situation. Cool. Well, I'm looking at the chat. I don't see any more questions. Yeah, that was what I was thinking as well, Brian. And my understanding is when it comes to like law enforcement agencies requesting for client data that is hosted on a company's infrastructure, you generally have to comply. It's not exactly a yes/no request. It's typically a mandate. Cool. Well, if those are all the questions, I want to hand it back to potentially Fiona to wrap up the webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Yishan and Sam, for your insight. Thank you for everybody too for the questions that you submitted ahead of time. And then during the event itself, it was really helpful to help us give more context to the product. We will be sending a follow-up email that will include the recording. I believe we'll be able to share the slides as well. Sam, is that okay?
We should be able to share most of them.
Okay, yeah.
Slides, maybe not.
Yes. A consolidated slide list we'll be able to send over. We'll also send a survey. We'd love to hear a little bit more about how you plan to use HCP Vault. So please do complete that. We appreciate your feedback. And thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you at a future HashiCorp event soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.